single day, like I've always done and always will.
Passing these bills on the floor, making yet another stand.
Welcome to this week's edition of New York Now. I'm Chantel Destra. New York State lawmakers were briefly at the Capitol this week to pass a second budget extender going through Tuesday, April 14th. Lawmakers were scheduled to have a 2-week break, but the unsettled negotiations over the state's budget resulted in an unscheduled session day. When asked about negotiations on the Senate floor, State Senate Deputy Majority Leader Michael Gianaris confirmed that negotiations were ongoing, but there were no estimates on when the budget bills would be introduced. And apart from the delayed budget, Gianaris is also gearing up to officially end his chapter in the legislature after 3 decades. We sat down with the leader to unpack his decision to not run for re-election and his legacy in the upper chamber. Here's that conversation. Thank you so much for joining us back on the show today, Senator.
Thanks for having me, Chantel.
Of course. Now, after more than 3 decades working and serving in the state legislature, you've made the decision not to run for re-election. Of course, you being the Deputy State Senate Majority Leader, this move represents such a major shift in the fabric of both the Democratic Conference as well as the chamber. So before we get into your accomplishments, can you tell us how you came to this decision to step away from the state legislature?
Sure. Well, my life has changed a great deal the last couple of years, especially. I have a baby at home, a toddler, I guess now. She's 2. I have an 11-year-old at home. My mom is 92. She lives across the street by herself. And so the sandwich generation is a real thing. I have to take care of young ones. I have to take care of an elderly person. And being here every week is just a little bit too much for that. And so it's time to get back home, start saving for college for these kids, and be around for them, watch them grow up.
And of course, you have been so influential in getting the legislative priorities of the chamber over the finish line. And you were naturally seen as a top contender to lead the conference after Andrea Stewart-Cousins. So, looking back at your legacy, what are you most proud of?
I think the things that I look back on, we've done so many things in all these years, but the one that has had the most profound impact was getting the majority for the Democrats in the Senate, and getting a majority that is hopefully going to be long-lasting and as permanent as you can be in a democratic process. Before 2018, when we succeeded, the Senate was in Republican hands for just about a century. There was a couple of years here and there when Democrats took office and took the majority and then lost it, but for 100 years, there was never a sustained Democratic majority, and now we're going on our 8th year in the majority. Our size is the largest, one of the largest majorities that's ever been. It's only been surpassed by ourselves a couple of years ago, and so I think that mission was accomplished, and now it's the right time to hand it off to the next generation and let them have a go at it. But I think what we've built and the foundation we've built here in the Senate will outlive all of us.
You were so influential when it came to recruiting insurgent candidates to challenge those incumbent IDC members. These are, of course, were members of the Democratic Party who were voting and working with Republican members of the legislature. When you mentioned Democrats securing the majority in 2019 and the work that you did leading up to that, do you think that you understood the magnitude of what you were doing at that time, or is it something that you can look back on in hindsight and recognize the work?
I think we understood it, but we didn't feel it in a real way. And 2018 was a year for the history books in the state legislature. We not only defeated 6 incumbents who were Democrats in name only, but were essentially handing the majority to the Republicans. We then went out and beat 8 Republicans in November. So a shift of 15, because there was also a primary that occurred when Senator Salazar won her race. 15 new members of the majority in the state Senate at once has never happened before. It's 25% of the entire body changing, and gave us the sizable majority we needed to govern. And defeating the IDC in those primaries was critical, because a majority with them obstructing and creating problems would have been very hard to govern with. The fact that we were able to have not just a majority, but a majority that was unified and pulling in the same direction made all the difference. And that 2019 session is one that will never be forgotten. We enacted so many important changes to the law, codifying Roe versus Wade before the Supreme Court even overturned it. We made sure that women in New York would have that continuing protections for the LGBT community, immigrants, which is now, again, a prescient move that we made, is giving them some additional support here in New York. The housing laws of 2019, the changes to the criminal justice laws. We turned this state around completely in that 1 year and have been continuing that work ever since.
How are you hoping that the Democratic Conference continues to build on the foundation that you helped to build?
Well, hopefully they are responsible stewards of this institution, listen to the people who elect them, and do the right thing. We're at a critical moment in the country. The states are more important than ever because of what's happening at the federal government. And there are some states that need to be a bulwark against the oppression that's coming from the federal government. New York has been one of them, and hopefully we'll continue to push the agenda, because I think the Senate, we have good allies in the Assembly, and the governor seems to be pushing in the same direction also. But the Senate's really been driving the agenda for this state in terms of making sure we maintain our progressive values and stand up against the things that are happening that we don't like out of Washington.
And another pivotal moment was when you helped to lead the opposition to Amazon building its headquarters in your district. So what can you tell us about the work and the strategy that you had to end that deal?
Well, there was a classic case of inside-outside collaboration. There's a tremendous grassroots effort that everybody knows about from these neighborhoods that were opposed to this project because they were concerned about the housing costs that would skyrocket, the stress on schools, the stress on mass transit, that the plan, other than handing Amazon a bunch of money, didn't really consider or factor in. And so people took to the streets to express that opposition. That was the kind of the support that I had that allowed me to then do the work up here on the inside. And it was a little bit of knowing the levers of government that helped, because there's this obscure board called the Public Authorities Control Board, which would have to give final approval to this project. And as we took the majority, the leader was kind enough to nominate me to serve on that board, which would have given a seat at the table to the concerns that so many people had about that project. The mere fact that I was nominated led Amazon to leave. And so I think that looking back on it was something I'm really proud of. You look at what's happening in Virginia, which was the other location that won this contest. They have ceased construction there. They are not going to complete their promises in terms of job creation down there. And then you look at what's happening in New York. They have created thousands of jobs in New York already, just not at a headquarters site in Long Island City. They have moved jobs into the city. The tax base is growing because of the executives that are working here. They just are in various office buildings in Manhattan, the way most other corporations in New York operate. And then you look at what's the pivot that that industry, and Amazon in particular, are going through. They are firing tens of thousands of executives across the country as we speak. And so had this been built, had they filled it with the jobs they promised that they're not creating in Virginia, there's a good likelihood that those people would now be getting fired. And so the fact that we stood up for this community, stood up for New York, refused to give our valuable and precious public resources to a company that doesn't need it to be here, and yet we're getting the jobs anyway. We're avoiding some of the pitfalls that we're seeing in Virginia and other places, and we're dodging the fact that we could have had this enormous infrastructure built that would be sitting largely empty right now.
What advice would you give to the next generation of legislators as they come to the Capitol and approach the work, but also potentially leadership?
The best advice I can give is don't get complacent and don't be passive about this job. It's a tremendous amount of power. It's a privilege to have. Use it to make change. I think too often people get in these jobs and they're very stressful and they're very busy and time moves quickly, and they don't move fast enough to enact the changes that would really move the ball forward. We did it great. 2019 would be the model in a sense of dramatic change in this state and advancements, the likes of which we haven't seen before or since. But for people that are here now, don't just think you have a 9-to-5 job and you're going to sit there and go to your events, get patted on the back, and go home. try and make something happen with the power that you have, because it's rare to have it, and it's a privilege.
Naturally, you being the deputy leader, you of course have a very close working relationship with the majority leader, Andrea Stewart-Cousins, and I'm sure she, of course, trusts your opinion 1,000%. So can you help us understand how your working relationship has developed over the years, and what role will you have in sort of, sharing your perspective in terms of what she should be looking for the next person to fill your position?
Well, the relationship is unique. We're incredibly close. We have served as a team in leadership for almost 15 years since we're in the minority. It was the end of 2012 when Senator Stewart-Cousins was selected by the conference to be our leader. That was when we were in the minority. I was her deputy from that moment forward, and so we've grown together. We have built this majority, fought for it, and then built it together. And we've, as a result, become very personally close, and we know each other's thoughts. We know how each other think and operate, and that's an incredibly valuable trait in a leader and a deputy, because you don't want to have to spend your time thinking about what the person means. If you can already understand where they're coming from, it's easier to figure out what you want to do as a leader. And so it's very hard to find that. So I don't know that would exist anywhere, but obviously someone she trusts and someone who is capable and has the experience to put the Senate before anything else. In a sense, being an elected official in the legislature is multiple jobs. You're a legislator for the conference, you do your work in Albany, you're a representative for your district when you go back home. And when you're in leadership, you really have to put the conference above all else. And trying to find someone who does that. Because the moment you have conflict between what's good for the Senate and what's good for your own politics, it can create a problem that is detrimental.
Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today, but thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today, Senator.
Thank you, Chantel. Appreciate it.
And we were speaking with State Senate Deputy Majority Leader Michael Gianaris. Recently, funding cuts on the federal level have left many minority and women-owned businesses across the state in a difficult financial position. As a result, many state lawmakers, along with the state comptroller, Tom DiNapoli, are pushing legislation meant to support these businesses. In this next segment, our Elise Klein dove into the proposed bills and the support for them at the Capitol. Here's that story.
In 1 year, New York State has experienced major impacts from federal funding cuts stemming from Trump's Big Beautiful Bill and executive orders. One area that is being hit the hardest is minority and women-owned businesses in the state, from storefronts to community nonprofits. Federal funding to the state has decreased by about $16 billion from 2024 to 2025, according to a recent Cornell analysis report. The drop in federal funding included $8.2 billion less in contract spending and $7.6 billion less in grants and assistance. For minority-owned businesses across the state, the disproportional impacts of these cuts mean hundreds of millions of dollars in reductions. For many businesses, the reductions in funding mean they are now struggling to effectively serve their community.
And that directly affects our programming. That directly affects how many people we can employ, that it eventually affects how much we can do and offer to the public.
The Red Bookshelf is a nonprofit that helps promote reading and learning in the Albany community through giving away books, facilitating after-school programs, and other education events. Collins Hackett says they have seen a significant drop in grants they are approved for at the federal level. The grants they've been denied total to more than $100,000.
That what we do is investment. It's investment into our young people. It's investment into our local infrastructures. It's an investment into entrepreneurship. It's an investment into workforce development. But a lot of times when the decisions are being made around tables without members of the community present, it feels more like charity. And it feels like, oh, well, they should be happy with whatever we're able to give. And that is incredibly problematic for us, because now the resources that our young people get and what we're able to offer to them is severely limited.
Rhea Barthel, an Albany resident and longtime volunteer, says organizations like the Red Bookshelf have an important impact on the community.
With the little libraries and with Red Bookshelf, it really is a wonderful way to get kids reading books and loving books.
Collins Hackett says the federal funding cuts have impacted the way in which the organization can manage its human resources and outreach efforts.
We've had situations where we ran a summer camp last year and I had to raise money for staff and I had to work with private philanthropists and I had to do bake sales and everything else under the sun in order to supplement, because for us, not providing for the kids simply wasn't an option.
Eva Bass, who runs 2 nonprofits that run community programs ranging from after-school activities and violence prevention to hosting community meetings on varying issues, Bridge the Gap and A Village Incorporated, shares similar frustration. Bass was approved and received a federal grant totaling $633,000 for the nonprofit organization A Village Incorporated at the beginning of 2025. This meant she was finally able to pay her staff full-time, some of whom were consequently able to come off public assistance because of their raises. A few months later, she received a notice saying they were not compliant with the grant stipulations. Bass says this grant would have helped sustain the organization for at least the next 3 years, and she is deeply concerned about being able to continue to operate.
We held on for dear life not to have to decrease our staff, but we had to decrease our staff back to part-time. Imagine what that looks like. It really affects the community. It affects the work. I really believe it's really a systemic attack against our community.
Other small businesses impacted by federal funding cuts also feel these fiscal changes, in addition to a recent executive order from the Trump administration related to diversity, equity, and inclusion policies, are a direct attack on communities. Co-founders Paul and Mary Liz Stewart of the Underground Railroad Education Center, a local history museum in Albany, who lost about $4 million in grant funding, say this money would have expanded public knowledge on the Underground Railroad and Black history. The 3-story brick building and former home of Black abolitionists Stephen and Harriet Myers, located in Albany, was built in the mid-1800s and served as a stop for the Underground Railroad. Today, the museum offers tours and community education programs. Paul and Mary Liz stress the center plays an important role in community education about the history of the Underground Railroad and local abolitionists like Stephen and Harriet Myers.
We don't want them to become the icons that Harry Tubman and Frederick Douglass have become, but rather we want folks to see Stephen and Harriet Myers and their colleagues as just regular folks who worked for justice, who stayed the course, and in so doing, remind us that just as they worked for justice in their day, we can do the same today. And so the hope is that people are inspired when they leave here, to see that they have a role in transforming history as well.
Many local community members walk away with a meaningful impact, the walls of the museum covered with notes left by visitors expressing their inspiration and appreciation for what they learned. Paul and Mary Liz want to expand this impact by building an interpretive center next to the Myers house. The total project is estimated to cost about $12 to $14 million. Paul and Mary Liz were approved in 2024 for 2 federal grants, one totaling about $3.8 million through the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and the other totaling $250,000 through the National Endowment for the Humanities. In May of last year, they got a notification that said the funding would be withdrawn. The DEH notification specifically detailed that they wouldn't have the opportunity to appeal that decision. And as a result, Paul and Mary Liz consequently decided to file a lawsuit against the NEH.
It's pretty clear to us that they violated their own rules in terms of how they withdrew the grant. So we're suing them.
In a statement sent to WMHT, a spokesperson from the EPA said the Biden-Harris administration forced a radical agenda of, quote, wasteful DEI programs and environmental justice priorities on the EPA's core mission, and those days are over. WMHT reached out to DEH for comment, but they did not respond despite multiple attempts. While the lawsuit goes through the courts, the nearly $4 million funding deficit for Paul and Mary Liz means their interpretive center project is stalled. It also means they could lose other funding sources as well, putting them even further behind.
Taking that money off the table meant that we were less close to our goal, 12 to 14, and some of the other funding sources felt that, well, if you're not that close to your goal, we're going to hold off. So that meant that in essence, there was potentially another $4 million that was taken off the table because of the loss of the $4 million. So it's really an $8 million impact.
Financial pains and concerns could continue for small minority business owners. Russell Weaver, director of research of Cornell's Buffalo CoLab, says they are expecting to see funding continue to decrease disproportionately for minority-owned businesses. Weaver says in addition to funding changes from fiscal year 2024 to 2025, Trump's executive order related to equal opportunity presents additional obstacles.
Effectively put some more strings attached to federal funding that couldn't be going to contractors on the basis of providing priority on discriminating by sex or in some cases race as well. And it was also the executive order that denied federal funds to organizations that might be using DEI hiring initiatives or something of that sort.
Weaver adds this could mean more disproportional effects on small businesses.
And so we're already seeing that happen in large numbers. And so the warning signs that are going off is that those numbers may be going even lower in the next fiscal year.
Some other business experts stress this impact will go beyond the small businesses. Bakita Davis-Friday, Dean of the Mastery School of Business at Albany, says these funding cuts will ultimately hurt communities.
What happens when we cut funding to these types of businesses, we're losing out on opportunities and services and goods for our communities, in particular underserved communities. So while the businesses themselves are suffering, also the populations that they serve will suffer, and ultimately our communities will suffer.
On the state level, some lawmakers and leaders are seeking to take steps to improve financial stability for minority-owned businesses. Some state lawmakers, along with the state comptroller, have introduced 2 bills related to community banking. One bill would increase the allowable amount of state deposits into the Community Banking Deposit Program from $20 million to $30 million. Another bill would help community banks and minority depository institutions by requiring certain financial institutions to protect state deposits. State Comptroller Tom DiNapoli says the recent federal actions underscore the need for these proposals.
It really underscores the need to unleash more capital for the minority banks so they could do what they want to do, which is serve underserved communities. So these 2 proposals will enable us to have more flexibility with the funding that we already have available, but to get that out to these minority banking institutions so that they can ensure that there will be access to financing for underserved communities.
State Senator James Sanders, a Democrat representing parts of Queens and a lead sponsor of the bill, agrees, saying actions at the federal level could send the country into a recession, which means the state has to build protections.
We need to stimulate the economy by ensuring that money is made available to people who deserve it.
Assemblymember Khalil Anderson, a Democrat representing parts of Queens and a sponsor of the bill related to the state deposits protections, adds his bill also helps right a wrong done by the state.
This state does not invest a single dollar into Black-owned banks and minority deposit institutions. And that's a crime, in my sense, in my way of seeing things, because there are Black and brown minority-owned banks and institutions that know how to lend to small businesses, that know how to lend to community groups, startups, and have additional products and such. But if they can't borrow and compete like their white counterparts or other mainstream counterparts, then that puts them at a disadvantage.
Anderson says simply, this bill will mean more money for minority and community-owned banks, which means more money and opportunity for local businesses. Some local Albany businesses say more state support would be very helpful. Local flower shop owner Marie Campbell, who is currently trying to expand her business and open a bigger shop, says she is worried about getting financial support, and state aid would mean a lot.
There's not many grants out there at this time, and we are obviously running out of space here. I've tried to just maintain the small space and do the best that we can with it. But what we're finding, we're getting a lot of contracts now, work that requires a lot of space, spreading out things. We're renting cooler trucks, which are really cutting into the profit. Last night we did the Chambers dinner, which was over 1,300 people. It would help.
Both bills have passed the Senate nearly unanimously and are currently in Assembly committees. Lawmakers who support the bills say it's important for the state to take steps to address inequities.
This is across this country, right? Whether it's downstate or upstate New York, people are always talking about access to capital being the thing. And I think what we're seeing, particularly for MWBEs, is a lack of access to capital.
And if you look at what has happened in banking over the last 80 years in that community, there's always been inequity. Redlining is very well documented.
Some other lawmakers say it's important for the state to take action at a time when the federal government is causing additional strains.
Any initiative that we take in New York State to build a firewall between us and the federal government is good.
Both bills also seem to be bipartisan bills with near unanimous support from lawmakers across the aisle.
We have to think about what can our state do to help these small businesses move along, help them keep their doors open and make it easier for them.
Again, this is one of those things where we talk about everything from financial literacy to people being able to save money, build something for themselves and their family to pass down. It starts with good financial support in the community, and that's what these bills will do.
While the bills have not yet passed the Assembly, some of the Assembly sponsors say this is important for them to get across the finish line before the end of session.
So I've named this as a priority bill through our internal process within the Assembly. I have a very good relationship and partnership with the chair, having served as the chair of the subcommittee. I've worked together with the Assembly chair for several years. I'm looking forward to it appearing on an agenda and it getting a fair debate.
Assemblymember Anderson adds lawmakers have put forth plans to try and tackle this issue in the budget, but it's not their only strategy.
If we don't win that fight, we want to pass it legislatively and continue, in that sense. We don't want to give up any chips. We want to put everything on the table.
Lawmakers have about 2 more months to pass their priority bills on this issue and even less time to pass budgetary measures, as the April 1st deadline for the state budget process has already passed. Whether lawmakers tackle these bills inside or outside of the state budget, there seems to be a determination to get it done this year. We'll be keeping an eye on this process as it unfolds. Elise Klein, New York Now.
Well, that does it for this edition of New York Now. Thank you for tuning in, and see you next week.
Funding for New York Now is provided by WNET,